Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's PolicyMap Back to School webinar. My name is Aaron Klein, and I work on PolicyMap's customer success team as our account representative. I am also joined today by my colleague, Julia Park, who is one of our data analysts. We hope that your semester is off to a great start and that we can help you make the most of your access to PolicyMap. So the main goal of our session today is to introduce you to some of our newest data sets and features. I'll start off the session by going over some of the basics of the tool, just in case you're not familiar with PolicyMap. I'll then give you sort of a high-level overview of the data and how you can customize it in some really unique ways. And then Julia will finish off the session by highlighting some of our brand new data sets that we're really excited about. We will also leave time at the very end for a quick Q&A session. And this is a GoToWebinar format. So what that means is that everybody will be muted throughout the session. However, if you do have any questions, you can either raise your hand in the control panel, so that way we can unmute you if you have a mic. And you should see a little hand symbol in the tab at the top left for that. Or you can simply just type in your question and it'll show up on just our screen. And if it's a question for everyone, we'll be sure to answer it. But if it's a more specific question, we can always follow up with you in an email. And we're going to try to answer as many questions as we can, but there are a lot of you in the session. So if we miss your question or we just don't have time to get to it, don't worry, because we will get back to you in an email. And then following the session, probably sometime tomorrow, you should be receiving a follow-up email from GoToWebinar. And that email is going to contain a couple of really helpful links for you, as well as a recording of today's session. So keep an eye out for that. All right, so let's jump into the map here. So this map is fully interactive, and you're able to pan around and zoom in or out. At the top of the screen here, you're going to see two different search bars. So to the right here, we have the location search bar, and this allows you to navigate down to an area that you want to view data for. And you can search for anything from an address to a city, a zip code, or any of these other geographies here. So if you want to view data for maybe the city of Seattle, I can just search for that. And then once I select it, it's going to zoom in and put the Seattle city boundary onto the map. And then the other search bar to the left here is our data search bar. And this is a really useful tool because what you'll see once we get into sort of the data portion is that there is a ton of data within the tool. And sometimes it might be a little bit difficult to find what you're looking for in these data categories at the top. But the nice thing about the data search bar is it allows you to search for maybe a keyword or even a couple keywords. So if I type for, or if I search for something like Hispanic, for example, it's going to pull up all the different keywords, or all the different data sets, I should say, that relate to that keyword. Over at the top left, we have this boundaries menu. And this contains all the different boundaries that are in PolicyMap. And for pretty much every single boundary that you see in this menu here, there's going to be some sort of data set in PolicyMap that's been aggregated to that boundary or geography. And with the location search bar, you can only search for a single geography at a time. But using the boundaries menu here, if we select something like, say, census tracts, for example, it's going to allow us to view them all at the same time. And the way that the boundaries menu is organized is that the first two columns on the left are all census-related boundaries. And these are ordered based on their size and how many people they represent. So the smallest census boundary that we have in PolicyMap are block groups here, block groups inside of census tracts inside of zip codes, and so on and so forth until you get up to the state boundaries. And then these other two columns on the right here are just some more unique boundaries that you can look at. Now, we also understand that sometimes during your research, you might be focusing on a very specific area that might not conform to any of the boundaries in the boundaries menu. And so we have a really unique feature that you can access at the top of the screen here called custom regions. And this is going to allow you to create your own unique region within PolicyMap. So once you click on this icon at the top of the screen, it's going to open up the custom regions menu. Once you're in here, you can view all the custom regions that you've previously created. And if you click on where it says create region here, you can then create a new custom region. And there are 3 different types of custom regions in PolicyMap. So this first one here is our drawn custom region, and this allows you to draw a custom region onto the map by either dropping points like I am here. We also have a second method that allows you to sort of click and drag to draw your shape. And you can add as many shapes as you want to a custom region. But once you're done, just click continue here. You can give that custom region a name, a description, and then toward the bottom, you can sort of customize it a little bit. And then once you click save, it's going to show up in your custom regions menu here. The second type of custom region is the assembled region. I would say that this one is probably used the most often amongst these 3 with our users. And what this one allows you to do is take pretty much any of the boundaries in PolicyMap, and you can assemble them to make your own unique region. So let's say we have a target area that's made up of maybe several different census tracts. I can just select census tract from the drop-down menu here. That's going to put those boundaries onto the map. And then all I have to do is simply click to select the geographies that I want to include. And then finally, the third type is our radius region. And this allows you to create a custom region around a specific point. You can either click onto the map to drop a point or type in an address into this search bar. And then the last step is to adjust the radius. So those are the 3 different types of custom regions. But once you've created your custom region, you can then take it to some of the other features of PolicyMap. So if I open up the one that I created earlier, you'll see this little bubble that appears at the top. And this allows us to do a couple of really unique things. So the clip feature, I will get to that later on once we have data on the map. You can also view data in a table format. You're able to download any data into a CSV file. And you can also generate reports. And reports are a very powerful tool because they basically allow you to quickly pull a lot of really valuable data for a specific area. There are 4 different types of reports to choose from. And each of these just contains different data sets. So for this example, I'm going to show you our community profile report here, which is more of a sort of a demographic report that gives you a snapshot of life in a given area. So once we click generate report, it's going to aggregate the data from within my custom region here. And it's going to give me data on things like population for my custom region, what the racial characteristics are. There's data on age, income levels, and much more. So really the benefit of the reports is that instead of viewing the data one layer at a time on the map, this allows you to quickly pull a lot of it at once, and it organizes it into a really easy to read report here. Any report that you create, you can always save it over at the top right here by clicking on the save icon. And then next to that, we also have a print icon, which is going to download a PDF of this report. I also want to mention that right now, all of these reports are pretty much standardized. So for example, every single community profile report is going to contain these same data sets that you see. But we are working on an update for later this year, which is going to allow users to customize these reports and pick and choose the data sets that they want to display in the report. All right, so next I'm going to dive into the data, and I'll highlight some of our newly updated data sets that I think are really interesting to look at on the map. I also want to just highlight that over at the top left, we have a My Data tab. And this is where you're going to find any data sets that you uploaded yourself using our data loader. What the data loader is it's a really unique feature that allows you to upload your own point or address level data. So if you have a spreadsheet of addresses, it will geocode those addresses, and then you can display them as points on the map. And there are really two main types of data that you're going to find in PolicyMap. The first type is what we call point data, and that's simply address level data. And typically that's going to be found under the first submenu in each of these categories, starting with housing. So if we look under housing here, we'll find housing locations. And this little icon just indicates that it's a point data set. Under quality of life, we have quality of life locations. I would say that this category is probably the most unique of all of these, just because it contains a lot of different indicators that we think affect someone's quality of life. So things like grocery stores, brownfields and superfunds, and institutions like nonprofit locations. Under education, we have education locations. So we can view where things like public schools are located or universities. And we actually just updated the NCEJST public school data. I think it was just last week. So this is brand new data here. And once you have your points on the map, you're able to customize them using the legend here. And you can even click onto each individual point, and it's going to display data for that specific point. This data set is really detailed, and it gives us things like some basic school info here, but it also includes things like the total number of students at the school, the student-teacher ratio, there's enrollment data, and demographics. And then if we look under the health tab, we're going to find health facility locations. And then some of our most recently updated point data sets are our pharmacy locations here, as well as our retail-based healthcare locations. So that's really a quick overview of the point data. But the vast majority of the data in PolicyMap is what we call layer data. And that's data that's been aggregated to a certain geography. So if we start over here under the demographics tab, we have some things that you're probably very familiar with, like population, age, and sex. But we do also have some pretty unique data sets in here as well. One of those is predominant race or ethnicity. And this is actually the most popular data set in all of PolicyMap. And this data, I believe, was updated earlier this year when we updated all of the Census ACS data. And what's really unique about this layer is that it combines all the races into just a single map here. So if you look in the legend on the left side of the screen, you'll see that each color represents a different race. And then the shading of each of those colors represents a different percent range. So in Seattle, it might not be quite as diverse as some other cities. So let's zoom on over to maybe New York City here. We should get a much more colorful map. Yeah, so these green areas here are predominantly Black areas. The purple areas are predominantly white. And then these orange areas are predominantly Hispanic. Under language, earlier this year, we added a bunch of new census indicators on language. So under language spoken at home, we can look at maybe where there's a higher percentage of people who speak something like Spanish at home. So here, the darker colored areas have a higher percentage of people who speak Spanish at home, whereas the lighter colored areas have a lower percentage. Under the housing tab, we have things like renter and homeowner affordability. And this data was updated, I believe, in May to the most recent 2018 through 2022 ACS estimate. So these data sets are going to allow us to see where there are a higher percentage of units that are affordable for someone making a certain percentage of the area median income. And I do apologize because my internet's being a little bit slow, so it's just taking a second for these layers to load in here. Under the quality of life tab, if we look under criminal justice, we just updated the FBI violent crime, property crime, and hate crime data sets to 2022. And what you'll see if I put something like maybe property crime on the map is that some data sets are going to be much more granular than others. So this one, for example, is available down to the metro division level, whereas other data sets might be available down to the census tract level or even the block group level. And that really just depends on the source and how they're releasing that data. Also under quality of life, we do have some brand new, super interesting environment and disaster risk data sets that Julia will be covering shortly. And then a couple of our other recently updated data sets. So under the economy tab, we recently updated our BLS monthly unemployment data. I believe the monthly data has been updated through March of 2024, and then the annual data was updated through 2023. I also want to make everybody aware that under the Curated Collections tab, we have a social determinants of health collection, and all of our academic users should have access to this collection here. And basically all of the data sets that are found in this collection can also be found under these other categories at the top. But we created this SDOH collection to make it easier for researchers or organizations who are focused on health equity to more easily find the data that they need. All right, so next I'm going to get into how to customize the data once it's on the map. So I'll start off by showing you how to customize layer data, and I'll add foreign-born population to the map here. So once you add a layer to the map, the legend will always appear on the left side of the screen here. And just within this little legend, there are really so many different ways to customize the data. At the top, it's going to tell you the title. So it shows that we're looking at the estimated percent of all people who were foreign born as of 2018 through 2022. Just below that, there is a little eye icon that you can click on, and it's going to pull up a description of that data set. In the legend, we can also see the source of the data. So this is telling us that it's coming directly from the census. And you can actually click on that source, and it's going to take you to our data dictionary here. And this is where you're going to find more detailed information about the source and how the data was processed. Using the legend, we can change the year of the data. So for this data set, we can go all the way back to year 2000, and we can view the data from back then. We can also change the variable. So maybe instead of percentage, we want to view the data as maybe the estimated number of people who are foreign born, or even as percent change over time. So now we can see that looks like in the majority of these areas, there has been a decrease in the foreign born population. But in a few of these areas, there's actually been quite a dramatic increase. At the bottom of the legend, you can change the aggregation level or the shaded by. So you can view this data at different geographies. So if I switch over to zip code, it's going to show it by zip code. And we can also view it at any of these other geographies here. If we click on the colors, I just want to highlight one of our newest features, which is the custom color range. So if you click on create a new custom color range, you can actually go in here and choose the color and the shading for each color within your range here. So that's really fun to play around with. And then finally, if we click onto ranges, you're able to change the number of ranges from 2 all the way up to 8. And you can even change the cut points themselves. So if we wanted to focus on areas that have a very low percentage or very high percentage of foreign-born population, we can maybe adjust each one of these so that we can better visualize that on the map. And really the benefit of doing that is that now, instead of having what seems like our random ranges, you have something that's much easier to interpret when you're looking at the map here. Someone asked, please show us again where you can locate the SDOH options. So the SDOH collection is going to be found under this Curated Collections tab here under Social Determinants of Health. And then probably my favorite feature of the entire tool is this map extent feature here. So by default, it's going to be set to US data. And that means that the ranges in the legend here are based on the data at the national level. So in other words, 1/5 of all census tracts within the entire US sit within this first range here. 1/5 sit within the second range, and so on and so forth. But sometimes if you want to view the data at more localized areas, a map like this one here might not be giving us too much information. So we can see that the majority of this area is sort of this darker purple, which means that it sits within this highest range here. And that's not really surprising for an area like Queens. But if we switch over to map extent, what it's going to do is basically take all the geographies within our entire window here, and it's going to use the data from just those geographies to recreate the ranges in the legend. So in other words, it's just going to make the ranges much more relevant to the area that you're looking at on the map. So you'll see that once I switch to map extent, it reshades. And now it's much easier for us to identify the areas that have a higher percentage of foreign-born population compared to the surrounding areas. So yeah, map extent is a super powerful feature, and it just sort of allows you to better understand more localized differences. We also just finished up quite a big upgrade to our clip feature. If you're not familiar with clip, basically it allows you to view data just within a certain boundary. So say we just want to see data for maybe Queens County, New York. I can put that boundary onto the map using the location search bar. And then at the top of my boundary here, it's going to give me the option to clip. And what that's going to do is it's going to remove all the data that sits outside of this boundary. And what you'll see now is that we now have a white background option, which will basically remove even the map itself that's outside of the boundary. So that is how to customize layer data. Like I mentioned, there is a lot you can do just within this legend here. So a couple of final things I just want to point out before I hand it over to Julia is that toward the bottom right here, we have a print icon, which will allow you to export a static image of the map. And earlier this year, we actually upgraded the print quality. So now it should be a little bit easier to interpret the map once you export it. You can switch between different layouts, different formats, and you can also customize things like the title. You can drag around the legend. But once you click export, it's going to download a static image of that map within your browser. If you wanted to share a more interactive map with someone, that's really what the share icon's for at the bottom right. And the two main ways to do that are by generating a link to your map or by emailing your map to another user. So once they open that map up, it's going to look just as it did when you clicked share, except they'll be able to go in here and interact with the data, customize the data, maybe even download the data if they have a subscription. And at the bottom right, this is also where you can save your map. You can access your saved work folder, as well as our citation tool. So this is a great tool for our academic users because it takes any of the data that's on the map and it automatically generates citations for that data. You can switch between the different styles here. And earlier this year, we did add the RIS file format, which you can export. There were a couple of other features that I was not able to get to, such as our multi-layer maps feature and how to download data. But I do want to point out that at the top of the screen, we have a great help docs page, which has tutorials on all these features. So that's a really great resource. And if you're more of a hands-on learner like I am, we have our robot PAM at the bottom left. She's our mascot. It's just map spelled backwards. But you can click on her, and it's going to give you a list of tutorials that you can walk through within PolicyMap. So if I want to learn more about maybe how to use the download modal, I can just open that up, and it's going to walk me through that process within PolicyMap. All right, so I am going to hand it over to my colleague Julia, who's going to give you an overview of two of our brand new environmental data sets that are super interesting. So let me switch over to her.
Hey, hi everyone. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Hi everyone. Thanks for attending today. In this portion of the webinar, I'll be walking through two environmental data sets. And before we dive in, I wanted to share some of the most recent environmental data sets that our data development team has released. The first is EPA's Environmental Justice Screening and Mapping Tool, EJScreen, Council on Environmental Quality's Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, CEJST. Two others that we won't be diving too deep into today, but are available on our website, is CDC's Environmental Justice Index, called EJI, and FEMA's National Risk Index, NRI. I know, lots of acronyms. So today we'll be looking specifically at EJScreen and CEJST. And for a little bit of background, EJScreen provides what's known as environmental justice and supplemental indexes. And these indexes combine environmental and socioeconomic data. The data then can be used to identify potential areas where people are most vulnerable or likely to be exposed to different types of pollutions. Similarly, CEJST uses environmental data as well, but CEJST uses 8 different categories of burden in order to create a common definition of quote-unquote disadvantaged communities. And these communities are areas that are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution. In the past, CEJST has been used by federal programs in the Justice 40 initiative to deliver investments to these disadvantaged communities and to allocate funds in climate, clean energy, and other related areas. So when these two data sets were released by their respective agencies, they were intended to complement each other. And I would say the biggest difference between EJScreen and CEJST is that EJScreen is more exploratory in nature. So it's used to understand and analyze for environmental and also environmental justice issues. So given that it's more exploratory, there's no predefined thresholds for burden, so to speak, whereas CEJST is more declarative. So it uses a data-informed method to create a common definition and a standard definition of what makes up a disadvantaged community or that disadvantaged status. And it focuses more on this labeled status of a community than EJScreen does. So let me walk us through these two data sets on our platform. So this is what our website looks like that Aaron was just on. For EJScreen, I'm going to be walking through under the quality of life tab right here. And under environment and disaster risk, 3 of the 4 data sets that I mentioned just now are in this tab. And for EJScreen, we're going to look at the national percentiles for today's demo. So as I mentioned before, EJScreen has environmental justice indexes and supplemental indexes. And these indexes are calculated by combining the environmental burden indicators and socioeconomic indicators. So you can look at those individual indicators on your own time. For today's demo, we'll be looking at the environmental justice, what we also call EJ indexes. And there's 13 different types of environmental indicators on here. The first I'll be looking at is particulate matter 2.5. So it might take a minute to load because there's a lot of data here. So this indicator, PM 2.5 for EJ index, it basically shows, it's measuring air pollution from fine particulate matter. And on this map, the areas of darker purple show census tracts with the highest combination of particulate matter pollution and social vulnerability compared to the rest of the nation. And so we see these darker purple areas in the Central Valley region of California. And so these census tracts have that higher combination of social vulnerability and particulate matter pollution compared to the rest of the country. And we also have a separate layer that shows state percentiles. Now we can zoom into a specific location of interest. You can also use the search bar as Aaron showed before. I'm going to zoom into Philadelphia. This is where PolicyMap is based out of. And as you zoom, the map should automatically adjust itself. Okay, there we go. So as you hover your mouse, you can see the actual EJ Environmental Justice Index values, and you can click on the specific tract that you're interested in. So let's say you're interested in this tract ending in 200. It has an EJ index value of 84. And when you click it, that value comes up. And so this tract's EJ value, index value of 84, it means it's in the 84th percentile, which means that this census tract ranks higher in this index than 84% of census tracts in the country. And when you actually click the census tract, it'll pop up this window. And so this info bubble gives you other indicators, such as percentile for percent low income, for percent people of color, and then the particulate matter 2.5. And the indicators that show up in this window are what are used in order to calculate this 84 EJ index value. And in terms of how this number is calculated, you can look at a detailed description of these calculations over here on this little I info bubble. And when you calculate it, our description will give you a detailed look and definition of how the EJ index is calculated, how the demographic index is calculated, and how all these come together to create this map. If you zoom in further, right now we're looking at the census tract level, but as you zoom in further, the map will automatically adjust to the block group level. So EJScreen is available both on the block group and census tract boundaries. And this will give you a really granular look at what's happening in your community on the block group level. And so you can click again, and similarly, the same values will come up for your block group. Now moving on to CEJST. CEJST is located in the Federal Guidelines tab. Right here on the left, it says CEJST. And like I mentioned before, CEJST is based off of 8 different categories of burden. And so these are the categories of burden they use in order to deem a community disadvantaged or not. Now, if you're just interested in looking at what is my community in the disadvantaged status or not, you can click the first tab up here. And this will also take a minute to load. So if you're looking at the city of Philadelphia, the purple tracks indicate disadvantaged status and the yellow tracks indicate not disadvantaged status. And for CEJST, CEJST is only available at the census tract level. So if you click on a specific census tract here that you're interested in, it'll show you once again as you hover your mouse over the disadvantaged status. And then once you click on it, it'll actually open up a window showing you the subcategories of burden that contributed to the overall CEJST disadvantaged community status. And so for this census tract, unfortunately, it scored a disadvantaged in every single category except for energy and workforce development. Now, let's say you want to look at what about it was in this category, climate change category of burden, that made this qualify as disadvantaged. You can go back into the federal guidelines menu and click on that specific category of burden that you're interested in looking at. So in this case, we'll demo climate change. And now the map will automatically update you to show the disadvantaged status in the climate change category of burden specifically. And if you click that census tract of interest once more, now the info bubble will update to show you additional indicators. And now here we see percentile values for the other indicators that CEJST used in order to calculate the climate change category of burden. And so for this specific census tract, this one was deemed disadvantaged because it had a particularly high projected flood risk of 93 in the 93rd percentile. And then it also met the threshold for low income. So each category and burden, if you look at the info bubble description, we actually outline what are those cutoffs and thresholds for the burden. And so in this case, it's census tracts that are above the 90th percentile for the following indicators and are above the 65th percentile for low income. And the threshold criteria varies slightly for each category of burden. So you can find them in the info bubble of each category. And like I said before, the rest of the categories are here for your viewing. And yep, that's all I have for today to show the 2 environmental data sets. And I'm going to hand it off to Erin to lead us into a time of Q&A.
All right, thanks, Julia. So we did get a couple of questions that came through the chat. Reem, I see that your hand is up. You want to go ahead and ask your question if you have a mic? If not, you can always just type it into the chat. There was another question that came through about using map extent for, I believe it was cities or counties, which was a really good question. So if you zoom down to a specific county, so I'm going to put, let's do Philadelphia County on the map here. And we'll look at something, let's do a demographic data set, like maybe population of color. Again, once you switch to map extent, the ranges are going to adjust, and now it's just based on the data for our entire window here. But if we wanted the ranges to just represent the data for, in this case, the county of Philadelphia, you can then clip this boundary. And then you'll see that once I do that, the ranges will recalculate, and it's only based on the data for Philadelphia County. And yeah, you can do this for counties, for cities, or any other geography. If you do not have a license, we do offer trials. If you are interested in a trial, I would recommend reaching out to us directly. So if you click on the Help Docs page at the top of the screen here, we do have a contact button, and you can reach us that way. Someone asked, will we get a recording of this presentation? Yes, so tomorrow you should be receiving a follow-up email from GoToWebinar, and that email is going to contain some really useful links, as well as a link to a recording of the session. We had another question about how to download data for the entire US. So yes, let me get into the downloads really quick. So there are really two main ways to download. We have a download modal at the top right, which is probably the best place to go if you don't really care about interacting with the data on the map and you just want to pull it from the tool. But you can also download directly from the map itself. So if we wanted to download for the entire US, we can just search for the US in the search bar. It will put the US boundary onto the map here. And then any data that we now add to the map is what we'll be able to download. So say we want data on something like maybe per capita income. We can add that to the map. And then if you click on the bubble at the top of your boundary here, you're going to see this option to download data. And what that's going to do is it's going to open up the sidebar on the right side of the screen here. So like I mentioned, any data that's on the map is what will appear in the sidebar, and that's what you'll be able to download. At the top of the sidebar, you can change the shaded by. So this is telling you the aggregation level of the download. So right now, what this would give me is a list of every single US state, and it would give me the estimated per capita income for each of those states. We could also do this at smaller geographies like, say, cities, but just keep in mind that if you're downloading for a really large area like the entire US, that download might take a while to complete. Someone else asked, can you please demonstrate the multi-layer option? Yes, so since we have some time here, let's zoom back into Philadelphia. So by default, it's going to be set to the single layer view, which you can see at the top right here. And with the single layer view, you've got, these different colors that represent different ranges and different levels of concentration on the map. But if we wanted to see how something like poverty intersects with something like, I don't know, maybe age or something else like computer access even, we would need to switch over to this multi-layer view here. And the first thing you're going to notice in the multi-layer view is that everything is just one color now. And the reason being is because if you look in the legend on the left side of the screen, you'll see that the range is going from 0%, which is the minimum for this data set, all the way up to 100%, which is the maximum. And it's your job to adjust these ranges here to identify the criteria that you want to see on the map. So let's say, for example, we just want to see census tracts where maybe at least 20% of the population are living in poverty. I can adjust this left number here to 20. And then the map reshades, and we're only left with census tracts in purple, where at least 20% of the population is living in poverty. And you can continue this process with up to 5 different layers. So now I can go in here and add a second layer. We'll do households with no internet access. And then it's just going to be the same process. So for the second layer here, let's say we just want to see census tracts where maybe at least 10% of the population or of households, excuse me, do not have internet access. You can just adjust the left number to 10. And now we're only left with census tracts in purple that meet both of my criteria here. And you can even click onto the map and it's going to tell you why it's meeting the criteria or why it's not. So this particular census tract here, we can see that it meets both of my criteria. But if I click onto one that's maybe not shaded in like this one, you'll see that it meets our criteria for people in poverty. But because the percentage of households with no internet is not at least 10%, that's why it's not shaded in. All right, so let's see what other questions we have in here. Someone asked, is there a glossary of terms? So we don't really have a glossary. We do have the data description, which for this data set, it's not really giving us much detail, but for more complicated data sets, the description is going to be really useful. But if you click on the source in the legend here, that's going to pull up our data dictionary. So this is probably the closest thing we have to a glossary. Someone else asked, can you please show how to access the SDOH data again? Yes, so the SDOH collection is going to be found under the Curated Collections tab, which is this last one here, under Social Determinants of Health. Someone else asked, is it possible to view 2 areas at once, such as Chicago and New York City? So what you can do is create a custom region. So in the case of Chicago and New York, you would want to create an assembled region here and then do it by city. So if I select city here, it's going to put the city boundaries onto the map. And then you can just select each one of those, and then it's going to allow you to view data for both of those cities at once. In terms of just like visually seeing a map of both of those cities, it's going to be tough just because they're so far apart. So I would recommend maybe exporting 2 separate images for each city. Someone asked, I just want to confirm that students are able to buy an individual use subscription and that once you have access to the data, that it is fully downloadable and able to be imported into various programs and enclaves. So we don't really offer an individual subscription. We do have non-enterprise subscriptions, but there's no student subscription. Like I mentioned, we do offer trials, but otherwise your university would need a subscription through the library. And once they have a subscription, yes, they can download probably like 99% of the data. There are just a few data sets that are proprietary and they can't be downloaded, but almost everything you can download into a CSV file. And then you can import that into other programs like Tableau or ArcGIS. Someone asked, when dealing with custom boundaries, what is the methodology for adjusting the data shown? Does it take a percentage of an area based on the percentage of, say, a census tract that's inside the boundaries? So for something like a drawn custom region, like this one here, it does follow what we call a 50% coverage rule. So say, for example, we had data at maybe the census tract level here on the map. The download would only include data for the census tracts that sit at least 50% inside of this custom region. So if we take a closer look at like this census tract here, the data from this census tract would not be included in the download. Whereas if we look at a different one, like this one here, this one would be included. Someone else asked, can you provide a link to a recording? Yes, so we are gonna send out a follow-up email tomorrow, and that's gonna contain a YouTube link to this recording. All right, so I know there are a couple of other questions in here that I might have missed, but we're gonna go through the list again after the session, and if there are any that I missed, I'm gonna get back to you in an email. All right, I just wanna thank you all again for joining the session. Like I mentioned, keep an eye out for the follow-up email that you should be receiving tomorrow. And I hope that you all have a great semester. Thank you.